Mrs. Kulbachevska-Figat. After the Protasevich affair broke out in May, a number of developments took place between Belarus and Russia, like Russia giving a loan of 500 million bucks to Belarus, or other signs of closer cooperation. So, what is going on right now in the relations between Russia and Belarus?
Uh, Hello, Vladimir. Thank you very much for talking to me again. Indeed, a lot of things happened in both Belarusian European relations and Belarusian Russian relations over the last week. And what is happening now is, I wouldn't say a definite turn of Belarus towards Russia, but indeed a turn that would stay with us for quite a time. Alexander Lukashenko was known for trying to balance between European Union and Russia over the last 2 decades, and he was trying to do this also on the eve of last elections. We remember that just before the election in August 2020, he said that he does not only fear a provocation from the side of the West, but also from the side of Russia. What is happening now, however, is that Russia turned out to be the only ally of Belarus at the moment, and that this cooperation is going to I won't say flourish, but is going to continue over some time. The fact that Russia offered a loan to Belarus is very important for Belarusian economy, which is in fact dependent on Russian loans and Russian support. And without that loan, Lukashenko would have been in a very big economical trouble in short perspective. The other important thing is that Belarusian goods that are being exported will be now going outside of Europe only through the Ust-Luga port in Russia, southern of St. Petersburg, after cooperation with Lithuania and Latvia has virtually collapsed, with possible contacts with Latvia and the usage of Latvian ports in Ventspils and Riga collapsed just after Protasevich affair, after the Latvian foreign minister decided to show open support to Belarusian opposition by viewing the by putting a white, red, and white flag instead of official Belarusian symbol. What is happening now is that Lukashenko got support from Putin, and an unconditional support, because Putin has been standing by his side from the very first day when Protasevich's plane was grounded in Minsk. But on the other hand, Lukashenko is now losing his earlier possibilities to play between Russia and Europe and to get the best from both sides. I see for now that the situation is not really comfortable for Lukashenko. From people who are close to him, we hear remarks that they want to be a part of Eurasian space, that they want to seek closer partnership with China or with the countries of Central Asia. So definitely Lukashenko understood that the game with Europe is over. Russia is the only partner and supporter for the moment, but there are already first steps made towards looking for alternative partners. For being dependent on Putin and his support is a very dangerous position for Lukashenko, and he knows that. Let me just remind that Belarus was not at all enthusiastic towards Russia integration initiative, the final steps for integrating with Russia. Lukashenko knows well that he won't rule Belarus as he rules it today if Belarus gets into closer union with Russia. So he does not want to be dependent on Putin, and he is already seeking ways to get out of the present situation when Russia indeed is the only partner and supporter of official Minsk.
Can you comment on what are the weak points in this situation for Lukashenko? you said that he used to balance, and originally he's not interested in getting closer to Russia, and now that he's maybe forced or chooses to get closer to Russia, what could turn against him in this special relationship?
There I see essentially two weak points in this special relationship. Russia wants to secure Belarus. Russia doesn't want any turmoil in Belarus. Belarus is too important in both strategic and symbolic meanings, and although principally strategic, that Russia doesn't want any mess inside. Russia wants Belarus to be a stable country with stable ruler who controls the situation. Lukashenko was such a person for quite a long time. Is he still now? It is not that sure. After all, what he did to the protesting people was outrageous at points. Some of the journalists, I talked to you last time about journalists who got 4-year prison terms for filming the demonstrations. I also mentioned, I think, the recently introduced law that forbids journalists from recording any demonstration in Belarus that is taking place illegally. So, in fact, the media in Belarus are now allowed only to focus on officially held events and official governmental positions. But this is even not the worst. People in Belarus are in general peaceful people, and they are generally very much anti-war people, remembering well what happened during the Second World War in their lands. So when they went to the streets, most of them had no intention to destroy, no intention to harm anybody. They wanted to to express their discontent in a peaceful way. And when what happened to the protesters who were then judged and sentenced is now met really with deep sadness by ordinary Belarusians who took place in the protest. And so we won't say whether Lukashenko survives next crisis. And next crisis may come sooner or later, either with worsening economical situation, which will worsen together with European sanctions. Either there is yet another crisis connected to elections, because there will be sooner or later new elections, either parliamentary or presidential, and the situation from last year may repeat one to one. And so, if a new wave of protest begins, and if other tactic is adopted by the protesters, then Lukashenko may not stay in power. What do I mean when talking about other tactic? I think of the Polish example, when of the solidarity movement, when people did not go to the street but rather blocked their factories, striked in the area of the factories, and thus forced the government to talk to them, because the state-owned economy was receiving blow after blow. The same thing might happen in Belarus if working class opposition gets organized once again. This is one possibility. The other is that another wave of protest is inspired from the Belarusian immigration from the Western countries that support Belarusian opposition, and at that point, Russia could even intervene in Belarus. There was such a scenario discussed during the first phase of the protest, when even Lukashenko said that he has an arrangement with Putin that Russians may enter if the situation gets really dangerous for him. And if this scenario is to take place, then Lukashenko will not stay in power, even as a secondary figure. And finally, there is also a variation when Putin just realizes how unpopular Lukashenko became. And if he does nothing to regain his popularity, which will be very hard to achieve, in my opinion, he may just replace him with someone else, with a person, or from either a person from the today's ruling circle of Belarus, or which is even more probable, to try to replace him from somebody sent from Moscow. For as I said, Russia cannot afford losing Belarus. It is a dogma for Russian geostrategists, and they will never allow Ukrainian scenario to repeat in Belarus. Just look at the map. If Belarus joins NATO or gets a European-oriented country, then there are just 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers from the border to Moscow, and this is something that Russia will never, never allow.
The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg commented just what you said, that Belarus is getting closer and closer to Russia. So, in this context, it needs to be reminded that Belarus is a NATO partner, even though it is a dictatorship. It is a NATO partner, and there have been various cooperations between NATO and Belarus. So, what is the Western strategy right now when the country seems to have made a choice?
Well, indeed, it is often a forgotten fact that for quite a long time, both European Union and NATO seem to accept Lukashenko as long as they hope that there is a chance that he will not submit to Putin, and that for the sake of staying in power, he will become more Western oriented. I even remember a moment when one of the politicians who is now also vocally supporting Belarusian opposition said that Lukashenko is a very warm person, very nice guy, and that perhaps we should not, well, we should stay in good neighborhood relations with Belarus. So yes, indeed, there were moments when the West hoped that Belarus would turn away, turn its back from Russia, and in this situation, even an authoritarian Belarus who could have been accepted into some form of cooperation with the European Union. It reminds me a little bit about the situation around Georgia and Georgia mainly, where Mikhail Saakashvili was getting a more and more one-man rule, more and more authoritarian, but nevertheless the European Union was closing its eyes because he was an anti-Russian person. You asked about the strategy towards Belarus on the side of the European Union. I think that for the moment, the European Union is rethinking its strategy. For over the last year, the last half of the year, the strategy was over the last 6 months, the European Union clearly hoped that the protests will win. And some countries of the European Union, such as Poland, Lithuania, and perhaps Latvia to some extent, have sincerely hoped that if people go to the street in thousands, in tens of thousands, and if the protests take place in the center of Minsk, then Lukashenko will have no other choice than to go. Lukashenko decided to stay, and now everybody is thinking, what next? Because what we see is a failure of a European Union strategy that was in use for more than 10 years, supporting the opposition, helping the Belarusian opposition to set up independent media, independent from the state Belarusian media, offering Belarusian students a chance to learn abroad, to join Belarusian opposition organizations abroad. Everything, all of that was taking place over the last decade. And now it turned out that you may do all of that. You can support the Russian oppositions with huge effort, and in the end, Lukashenko just decides to stay. Well, now they are thinking what to do next, and I think that economic sanctions are inevitable, even stronger economic sanctions, and Belarus will be isolated from Russia, from from European Union even more than it was over last year, which, however, is I think, a scenario for which Lukashenko is perfectly prepared. Some people from his government are already saying that if there is a total embargo on European goods, if there is a total blockade on trade between Belarus and the European Union, then they will turn their backs to the EU and go towards cooperations with the Eurasian countries. I think they are seriously seeing this alternative, and Europe is not thinking beyond sanctions.
I was wondering what the current development means in the context of the new American administration. We know that Putin and Biden will meet this month in
Mhm.
Switzerland, and maybe Belarus will be on the agenda. So, what do you expect from this meeting, both from it in itself and with regards to Belarus?
Well, I'm absolutely sure that Belarus will be on the agenda. For what Lukashenko did to Protasevich, our airplane was just too spectacular not to be mentioned by the American empire. And I think that for sure Joe Biden is going to speak about democracy and that Russia should not interfere in Belarusian affairs. Um, New American administration is taking, I think, a more aggressive stance toward Russia than Donald Trump's administration did. And Joe Biden will not give up Eastern and Central Europe. And I think that there are people in his administrations who want to continue work to strengthen American presence in this part of the continent. Lithuania is already a very faithful American ally. Poland as well has accorded its foreign policy with the United States. And Belarus is, in fact, one of the last places in Eastern Europe where Americans do not have strong presence and which is leading an independent foreign policy. Americans know perfectly how important is Belarus for Russia, and they will keep working so that Russia loses its influence in Belarus.